Hi. Did you know that Martin Luther King Jr. was not born as Martin Luther King Jr.? His name was Michael King Jr., and his father's name was Michael King Sr., and also that he was a Hebrew American, and that there were Black Hebrews who were in the Holocaust in Germany, as well as the European Jews that were in the Holocaust. And so the reason why Hitler wanted to burn them up was because he wanted to rid the Europeans of the Negro blood because they had mixed blood. And so Martin Luther King, I got this article, talks about Martin Luther King being in West Berlin and the German connections. So I started reading it because I wanted to know more about this name change. And so it says that when Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia, his birth certificate listed him as Michael King Jr., after his father, Michael King Sr. Now I'm going to talk about Michael King Sr. because I didn't know too much about Michael King Sr. except for he was still living after Martin Luther was assassinated. And it says that in 1926, King began his studies to become a Baptist minister at the Morehouse School of Religion. In that same year, he married Alberta Williams in the Ebenezer Baptist Church that her father headed in Atlanta. Michael and Alberta had 3 children, one named Willie Christine, the other one Michael Luther Jr., and the other was Alfred Daniel Williams. Now, after the death of Alberta's father, King took over as the pastor of Ebenezer Church in 1931, a position he would hold for 4 decades. That was 16 years after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. All right. And then it goes on to say that Reverend King Sr. was the best paid Negro minister in the city. And then in 1934, he was able to join 10 other Baptist ministers for a trip to the Holy Land, Europe, and which it included a visit to Berlin, Germany. Now, getting back to the Holy Land, in 1934, Israel did not exist on the map. And Israel did not exist until 1948 under the Balfour Agreement with the Lord Rothschild of Great Britain. And so before that, it was called Judah, and the capital of Judah was Jerusalem. Okay? And there was a place over there called Joppa or Jaffa. See, all of those places also began with a Y. But we're not going to get into that. It says that it included a visit to Berlin, Germany. Now, Dr. King Sr. attended the 1934 Baptist World Alliance Congress. So it's political as well. In Berlin, where the backdrop of the speaker's platform included a large swastika flag, the neo-Nazi flag, and right alongside a cross and portraits of famous Baptists. Yes, the neo-Nazi flag was on the other side. And so after he came back from Germany, it says that he was named Martin Luther after the Lutheran Protestant reformer. And so they decided to change his name to Martin Luther King Sr. All right. So later on in the years, because there was so much racial unrest and civil rights unrest, that he had to get control over the Negroes so that they could have something to assimilate to in order to join the European culture. Because under the Protestant religion. So Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy also went to Germany in 1964, 30 years later. And they were at the Berlin Wall in Germany. So my question is, why was it so significant for these, black men? We have so many names, but, they was calling them Negroes at the time. And even though Negro is in the Bible and it's in the Zondervan Bible, and says that we are, in fact, the Hebrew people and not Ham, like they were trying to tell us that we were Ham and cursed because of our skin. Our skin is blessed. All right. And so after that, President Obama went to Berlin, Germany, to visit Berlin, Germany. And it says that he said, this was before he was the presidential nominee in 2008. It says that I know that I don't look like the Americans who previously spoke in this great city. And the author's like, really? And it says that his address was well received in Brandenburg, Germany. But it says that he failed to mention anything about Martin Luther King. And instead, he evoked the President Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, the same Ronald Reagan that had the war on drugs and that had the mass incarceration. I'm just going to leave that there. And so, getting back to Morehouse College, or Morehouse School of Religion, it says that the scientist Eugene Fisher was stationed in colonial Southwest Africa, and he studied the Southwest African families. And from his studies, Fisher sprang the fraudulent science of American eugenics that medicalized racial theory and propelled by abundant financing from the Carnegie Institution, Harriman Railroad Fortune, and Rockefeller Foundation. Eugenics ultimately led to the sterilization of some 60,000 Americans under laws in 27 states, as well as racial and ethnic incarceration. Now, more about the Rockefellers and Morehouse. The Rockefellers sponsored the education of the African Americans and Native Americans because he wanted to have control over what they were learning. They wanted to make sure that it was called the Morehouse School of Religion, and Spelman was called Spelman Seminary. They wanted to make sure that they were learning what they were supposed to be learning as far as the Protestant religion, as far as being assimilated into the society as Protestants. And so they, sponsored a lot of money and poured a lot of money into Morehouse and Spelman, and also into the Ebenezer Baptist Church, because that was built in 1884. And it says that in 1884, they met with the Morehouse people to pour finances into Morehouse. Now, this is how they felt, because Rockefeller was from Germany. And he was at the, this was at the Madison Square Garden in 1939, and they had a rally that, was pretty much against the Negroes. It said, everywhere fear gripped German society that its racial superiority would be poisoned by Negro blood. And so the deliberate effort to systematically exterminate an entire group was by the Germans in Southwest Africa. Even the Pope Benedict and his successor voiced objection to African presence in German soil, on German soil. But the protest or the rally in Madison Square Garden was before the Holocaust in Germany. And so President Lyndon Baines Johnson, he actually helped the migrant European Jews to settle into Texas. And he wanted to, but the only thing that he wanted from the Negroes was to make sure that they voted. And it says that, I'll just do this a little bit. I guess he signed the Civil Rights Act, or the Voting Rights Act. And he says, I'll have those N-words voting Democratic for the next 200 years. And it says these Negroes, they're getting pretty uppity these days, and that's a problem for us since they've got something now that they never had before, the political pull to back up their uppityness. Now we've got to do something about this. We've got to give them a little something, just enough to quiet them down, not enough to make a difference. So let's put them on a $20 bill. And so there you have it. And therefore, the $20 bill that they're putting Harriet Tubman on instead of Andrew Jackson. See, it was the evangelicals that had the Cherokees put on the Trail of Tears by begging Andrew Jackson to do it. And so Andrew Jackson put the Cherokees and some other native people, black native people, on the Trail of Tears. Yes, they did. And took thousands of miles of land from them and replaced them with the Europeans. That's the story. All right. And then in the Jewish Standard, the Times of Israel, it has Martin Luther King and the Hebrew prophets. The 50th anniversary talks about him being a Hebrew. Okay. And it says that on his last speech, he talked about when he was at the Masonic Temple, when he said, I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. See, these are the things, the lines that they've eliminated so that we wouldn't know who we are. And also it says, it's talking about the promised land. Remember that speech? Well, here's what they left out. It says that he talked about the prophets, Moses, and all of that. And he says that King continues with his vivid description of the prophets. They did not believe that conscience is a still small voice. They believe conscience thunders or does not speak at all. They were articulate, passionate, fearless, attacking injustice, corruption, whether it's guilty be kings or their own unrepentant people. Without physical protection, scornful of risk evoked by their unpopular messages, they went among the people with no shield other than the truth. And it says that we need the Hebrew prophets today because decent people must be imbued with the courage to speak the truth, to realize that silence may temporarily preserve status or security, but to live with a lie is a gross affront to God. The Hebrew prophets are needed today because we need their flaming courage. We need them, Hebrew prophets. He said that. Okay? So he was a Hebrew. And he realized that, and he was that, but his father was with the Nazis. Okay? And so that's why they were saying, oh, all he wanted was the civil rights and right to vote. No, that was not. Because he wanted to get us a treaty and a province, because African American is a misnomer and black is not a nationality. And so I want to tell you also about the pearls. The pearls was worn by Queen Victoria, and their newly wealthy trade and industrialization sought to emulate the nobility by purchasing and wearing pearls. And so they practiced the enslavement of people from East Africa, and all the way through the 20th century, some enslaved came from Mozambique and Tanzania. And so it says that the Arabian ship owners worked in a network of global trade with merchants from India, and then funneled many of the valuable pearls into American and European markets. I'm out of time. Thank you for yours.